What is extreme ownership? Where did the term come from? And why should you adopt it in your workplace? All those questions will be answered right now. Hey everyone, welcome back to Modern Mindset. A few days post-operation, so this video may be a little shorter, a little more disorganized, but I promised y'all one video a week and we're going to keep to it. With that being said, let's get back to your regular scheduled content. Extreme ownership is a term coined by the ex-US Navy SEAL Jocko Willink, and he also released a book by that same title, which is where I learned about this leadership style. Extreme ownership is a unique approach to leadership. It's a practice where you take ownership or responsibility for all aspects that result in whether or not your team succeeds or fails. This isn't a natural mindset by any means. When we're kids growing up, we're always looking for someone to blame whenever we miss the mark or we fall short or something along those lines. This constant need to blame someone else for your shortcomings has become almost driven into children nowadays. Now you have participation trophies where everyone has to win in some way or something like that, or you have people who have parents who are just blaming the coaches anytime their kid fails, which is just setting up their kids for failure in the future. We've basically removed all ownership of individual responsibility from any type of action. It's definitely easier to live in a world where you can just blame someone else for any mistakes you make. You no longer have to take any kind of responsibility for any of your shortcomings anytime you fail or you don't reach your goals. You just blame someone else. But Jocko Willink doesn't accept that. And he definitely approaches it and directly addresses that issue in his book all the time. Which that brings us to this week's question of the week. What are some books and some audiobooks that y'all would suggest that someone else reads? I definitely would recommend doing Extreme Ownership by Jocko or Outliers. Both books are very informative and very entertaining. Like if you're into just seeing the statistics and then really observing different mindsets and different approaches, they're both very informative and I find them at least entertaining enough to listen to while working out. Leave your suggestions down below. We definitely can all benefit from reading a little more nowadays instead of being on social media as much. All right, back to extreme ownership. Extreme ownership basically flips around this entire childish mindset where you're trying to blame other people for your shortcomings and actually take part and take ownership of all parts of the process, even if they are shortcomings or they are failures. It's part about being the leader of the team rather than just being the individual who takes credit for the success of the team. This can be a little complicated, so let's dive a little deeper into it. Basically, if your team fails, if you fail, or anyone under you fails, you're taking responsibility for it. Because ultimately, it's your fault. Ultimately, this may not seem fair in some situations, but it's a different kind of mindset. It's where you're focusing more on what you could have done better rather than what the junior person could have done better. It's no longer looking to find fault in what the person under you did, but looking in the fault where you went wrong. Because ultimately, you are the one who was supposed to set them up for success. Maybe the instructions you gave them weren't good enough. Or maybe you didn't confirm that they actually understood what you wanted. Or X, Y, or Z. Any of these issues are stuff that you can take responsibility for. It's stuff that you don't need to blame them for. It's stuff that you could have done better. In the end, you'll have to take ownership for what your team does. If they come up short, it's your responsibility because it was your job to make sure they are ready to be successful. One argument that I came up with in my head where I thought people could argue against this idea was you're almost taking responsibility from the people under you for their actions. But that's not exactly true. What is really happening is they're actually responsible to your team. If they make a mistake, they're responsible to each of the members in their own team, in their own unit. But you're responsible for the actual team's work and what they have done. So you're not gonna go and put their head on the chopping block to the people above you. You're ultimately gonna take responsibility because it was your job to make sure they were successful. Because one of the tells of a bad leader is someone who's gonna go and try to blame someone under them in order to make sure they save their own ass. Another issue I thought about whenever I was actually listening to the book was that it would almost seem like the leader would become too controlling, that they would end up trying to control every aspect of the process in order to make sure they were successful. But Jocko ends up nipping this one right in the butt. Because there's definitely diminishing returns whenever you start spreading yourself too thin and you start trying to control every aspect of the process. There's a reason why most businesses follow that kind of tree-like structure of a hierarchy within their overall leadership. And it's because if you start trying to control too much, you start end up spreading yourself too thin, and you end up making sacrifices in this place and that place where if you would have just delegated that task, it probably would have been done better. If you're trying to do everything, you're still only going to have a certain set amount of time. So what are you going to allocate 25% to one task, 10% to another task, and then 5% to another one, and so on and so forth, until you can no longer allocate enough time to an actual task in order to make it actually successful. The other folly to this kind of process is if you're trying to do everything yourself, and if you you ever get sick or something like that and you don't trust anybody, then your entire company falls apart, or your entire job falls apart because no one understands your vision. The other option is to distribute responsibilities among people you trust. And this is actually the better option, because what you end up doing is you end up talking about vision more than you talk about details. You start talking to these people who you trust already and make sure that they actually understand what your goal is, what your thoughts are, and so that they go and do all the detail work and all the grunt work, and they are just trying to implement your vision. And you trust them, so you no longer have to care about the details. You just care if they are successful or not. By doing this, you're also creating more leaders. You're giving these people actual responsibilities rather than just giving them these placated tasks or something like that that actually have no meaning. By making more leaders, you're going to grow your company in a more scalable way. Another benefit of implementing extreme ownership is that your subordinates will actually trust you. They'll know that you have their back and that you're not going to go and blame them anytime something fails. That you're going to take ownership of the actual task, and that they can actually try new approaches without having to worry about you putting their head on the chopping block. I would say I can attribute a good amount of my success at my job due to this practice, even if it wasn't intentional. I was put on a project as a junior developer, just one other senior, and I was forced to take on these complex tasks because there was no one else. But I never felt like if I failed at a task or if I had to ask questions that it'd be held over my head. This allowed me to tackle these new complex tasks without having to worry about being punished if I failed. By tackling these complex tasks, my development skills, my communication skills, and my overall skill level rose much quicker than if I would have been stuck on a project where I wasn't challenged as much. Due to the success I've had with this approach, I've actually implemented it in my life as well for the people I'm mentoring. And I found that it's given both myself and them more opportunities to grow and more opportunities to succeed. They get to challenge themselves and try to tackle more complex tasks, while I also get to challenge myself with my communication skills and my leadership ability. If anyone's interested, I would definitely recommend Jocko's book. It is very engaging, and it definitely will explain extreme ownership way better than I ever could. He draws direct relationships between the lessons he learned in the military and their application in the actual business world. And he does it in a creative and entertaining way. I actually listened to the book while working out, and just his voice gets you pumped up for a lift any day. If you stuck around this long, maybe smash the like button, subscribe, comment down below. Help me out with getting the channel out everywhere. But thanks for watching the video, and see you next week on Modern Mindset.